And Yahuwah visited Sarah as he had said, and Yahuwah did to Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived, and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which Elohim had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Yitshak.
Hello to all, and welcome to Covenant Life. I'm John Taplin.
I'm Terry Hetland.
If you have been following this entire series, you'll somewhat appreciate the magnitude of what has happened here. Abraham is now 100 years of age, and Sarah is 90. Abraham has departed Haran with Sarai and Lot when he was 75. This can be found in Genesis 12, verse 4. So 25 years had elapsed from the time which Yahuwah told Abram to move from Haran until the time when a newly born son would be born that would be a continuum of the covenant.
And for 25 years, Abraham had been led about and protected and even prospered. But the prosperity that Abraham had originally asked Yahuwah for wasn't cattle or silver or gold or maidservants or manservants. What he really wanted was an heir to carry on the life that was in his loins. But Yahuwah had more in mind than giving him an heir. What he had in mind was to bring about nations that would bear witness to his own sovereignty over all. He would create one covenant people that would come through one single son, through a specific father-mother combination. Abraham and Sarah would parent Yitshak, whose name would mean laughter, and both Abraham and Sarah laughed at the prospect.
But there is laughter that is good-spirited, and then there is laughter that is malicious, isn't there? I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But before I do, please read Genesis 21, 8 through 13.
And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Yitshak was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Therefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not be heir with my son, even with Yitshak. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight, on account of his son. And Elohim said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in your sight because of the lad, and because of your handmaid. In all that Sarah says to you, listen to her voice, for in Yitshak shall your seed be called. And also the son of the handmaid will I make a nation, because he is your seed.
Now here's a great example of when the Hebrew language is needed to offer explanation about what we have just read. I'm going to show you two words with the Strong's lexicons. The first is Yitshak, the name of the covenant child. Here we see that his name means laughter or even mockery. When Sarah saw Ishmael, and the translation rendered it mocking in verse 9, here the word is sakak. The concordances describe this word as follows: a primitive root, to laugh outright in merriment or scorn, by implication to sport, or to laugh, to mock, play, or make sport. In fact, this is the same word that is used to describe Sarah's response in Genesis 18:8 when she first heard she would conceive a child. And this would apparently be the reason that Yitshak would be named with a name that indicated laughter. But as we said, laughter can be sweet or it can be insulting. And the laughter of Ishmael, who would now be about 16 or 17, was not well received by Yitzhak's 90-year-old plus mother.
Let's pick up this again at Genesis 21:13. And also the son of the handmaid will I make a nation, because he is your seed. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away, and she departed. and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the bottle was gone, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down over against him a good way off, as it were a bowshot. For she said, Let me not look upon the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice, and wept. And Elohim heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of Elohim called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for Elohim has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in your hand, for I will make him a great nation. And Elohim opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went, and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad drink. And Elohim was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became, as he grew up, an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt.
To me, this translation reads like the lad was a child, just a little child, back in verse 14. Yet I suggested earlier that he was probably about 17. And let me tell you why. In Genesis 16:16, we are clearly told that Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. Abram was now 100 when Yitshak was born, and a child was likely not weaned until it was at least 2 and perhaps older at that time, making the lad Ishmael 14 when Yitshak was born and about 16 or 17 when he was weaned. It is impossible that he could have been less than 14. It's also worth noting that this is the second trip to the wilderness for Hagar and Ishmael, and the second time of distress. The first occurred back in Genesis 16 when Sarai sent her on her way. Both times the outcomes were the same. Yahuwah intervened to save Ishmael. He had plans for him also.
That's right. But that is about all that will ever be said about this lad. The focus of Scripture now shifts back to Abraham and Yitshak. We are going to continue reading at verse 22. And it came to pass at that time that Avimelech and Pekol, the captain of his host, spoke unto Abraham, saying, Elohim is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by Elohim that you will not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto you, you shall do to me, and to the land in which you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear.
Here we see that Avimelech continues to recognize that Abraham is special, and he requests that Abraham will deal truthfully with him. He no doubt remembers when he brought Sarah into his household, and Yahuwah told him he was as good as dead. He wants things to go well for himself and the generations to follow on account of Abraham, and not the opposite. The conversation continues in verse 25. And Abraham reproved Avimelech because of the well of water, which Avimelech's servants had violently taken away. And Avimelech said, I know not who has done this thing, neither did you tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen, and gave them unto Avimelech, and they too made a covenant.
Here we see that covenant was not limited to being made between Abraham and Yahuwah. Here, Avimelech is desiring to enter a covenant with Abraham. The dispute over the well is probably why the conversation comes up. Now let's continue. In verse 28, and Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Avimelech said unto Abraham, What means these 7 ewe lambs which you have set by themselves? And he said, These 7 ewe lambs shall you take of my hand. that it may be a witness to me that I have dug this well. Therefore he called that place Beersheba, because they swore both of them. So they made a covenant at Beersheba, and Abimelech rose up, and Phicol, the captain of his host, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and called there on the name of Yahweh, the everlasting El. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines many days.
A covenant was made with Abimelech. The name of the place was then called Beersheba. What was so important about what happened here that the location would be named to indicate the transaction?
Like laughter, this is another place where looking a little deeper is very helpful in understanding what's transpired. Now, here we can see that this word is not a single word, but two. The first is spelled approximately B-A-R and pronounced Beer, and this word means well. The second is Sheba. This word is a little more complicated. Let's look at lexicon H7651, which is based on H7650. Here we see that the word Sheba related to the number 7, and that 7 number represented fullness, just as the Sabbath is the seventh day, the completeness of the week. And looking at the word from which Shebath was rooted, shown as H7650, it appears that this word represents, quote, to seven oneself, that is, swear, as if repeating a declaration 7 times. Charge by an oath, which an oath, feed to the full. In short, what Abraham meant by the choice of the name was that this is a completeness and perpetual oath for relating to Abraham and his offspring ownership of that well. The 7 lambs were a 7-fold oath.
When Abraham was asked by Abimelech what the 7 sheep meant, the 7 sheep were to represent completeness and perpetual purpose of this oath, something that Abimelech may or may not have understood based on the dialogue. But Abraham was very intentional. If it hasn't jumped out at you yet, covenant is serious business. An oath and covenant represented a commitment as valuable as life itself. Breaking of it was serious enough that one should go to his death rather than breaking it. The closing of the description of this event gives the following description. And Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of Yahuwah, the everlasting El.
This was a long pattern with Abraham. He would acknowledge Yahuwah's work in his life and circumstances and acknowledge Yahuwah's strength and name. And now we will move to Genesis chapter 22 to an event that the heir Yitshak would himself experience with his dad, the patriarch Abraham, in the progression of the covenant relationship to him. The chapter opens with the following words, "And it came to pass after these things that Elohim did prove Abraham. And he said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am." What is about to come is an event that will test Abraham to a level that has not yet been required of him. This is the first time documented in Scripture that the young Yitshak will see the seriousness and determination of his father's faith. So let's now read chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. John, could you read them for us, please?
Yes. And it came to pass after these things that Elohim did prove Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, even Yitshak, and get you into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell you of. And Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Yitshak his son. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went to the place of which Elohim had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place far off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Remain you here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Yitshak his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they went both of them together. And Yitshak said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, Elohim will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which Elohim had told him of. And Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in the order, and bound Yitshak his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of Yahuwah called to him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Lay not your hand upon the lad, neither do anything unto him. For now I know that you fear Elohim, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Yahuwah Yireh. And it is said to this day, In the mount of Yahuwah it shall be provided.
Well, it is worth considering for a few moments what Abraham has been willing to do. He was willing to follow through and sacrifice a son that was finally given to him at age 100, to the one that provided that lad.
And this son was the covenant child. The whole time, Yitshak was witnessing an event in a way that he could never forget. He watched his own life be spared with the provision of a replacement sacrifice. This memory must have driven home that relationship in a way that nothing else ever could. In addition to Yitshak being affected by Abraham's obedience, let's read on and see Yahuwah's assessment of what has just occurred.
And the angel of Yahuwah called unto Abraham a second time out of heaven, and said, By myself have I sworn, says Yahuwah, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand in which is upon the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose up and went together in Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba.
That's very powerful. Yahuwah has given the seed of Abraham through Yitshak to be a blessing to all the earth. In the next module, entitled Yitshak, we will continue to follow Yitshak in his destiny. We will close by reading again chapter 22, verses 15 through 19. We hope you are enjoying this study. Peace to you.
Shalom. And the angel of Yahuwah called unto Abraham a second time out of heaven, and said, By myself have I sworn, says Yahuwah, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba.